Excellencies and colleagues, members of the Bureau of the Committee for the Exercise of Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. Good morning to our distinguished panelists and to our guests and friends around the world. I wish you all a warm welcome to the second virtual event organized by the committee. My name is Sheikh Niang, and I am the permanent representative of Senegal to the United Nations, and I am chair of the committee. I am joined by colleagues and members of the Bureau of the Committee. I can recognize Ambassador Ana Silvia, permanent representative of Cuba to the United Nations, Ambassador Neville Goetz, permanent representative of Namibia to the United Nations, Minister Riyad Mansour, Minister and permanent observer of Palestine to the UN, Ambassador Feda Abdullahi Nasser, Deputy Permanent Representative of Palestine to the United Nations. I don't know if other colleagues have joined in the meantime. If so, they can please signal when they can. My colleagues will not be appearing on the screen, but they will be brought on if they have comments to make or questions to ask to the panel. Before we start, let me also thank most sincerely and congratulate the great team of the UN Division of Palestinian Rights, led by Dynamic Director, Mr. Elio Tamburi, for organizing within just a week, in the context of a huge constraint posed by COVID-19, this second virtual event. I think, and in doing so, they are allowing the committee to reach out to the friends and supporters of the Palestinian cause via new technology. In fact, it is precisely in challenging times that we must reinforce our support and solidarity to the Palestinian people. As I hinted, last week we held our first virtual event, which was focused on Gaza and the work of UNRWA there. You all can find a recording of the event on the committee website and on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Today, we are talking to three representatives from civil society based in the occupied Palestinian territory, precisely from three locations: from the West Bank, from East Jerusalem, and from the Gaza Strip. They will address the following topic, I quote: the COVID-19 pandemic under occupation, national resilience, and international support, end quote. We will be asking our panelists to tell us how the Palestinian population in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza is facing COVID-19 under the ongoing Israeli occupation. We will also ask our speakers to elaborate on the challenges and restrictions in their respective locations and how Israel, the occupying power, is measuring up or not to its responsibilities under international law vis-a-vis the occupied Palestinian population. We will also ask them to look into options and strategies on how we as member states, as well as the global civil society, can provide continued political support and practical support to the Palestinian people, especially during this difficult time of multifaceted crisis, which is at the same time humanitarian, economic, and political. Before giving the floor to our friends in Palestine, let me briefly say a few words about the committee, established by the UN General Assembly in 1975 to pursue the following main three goals I will mention. First of all, it is promoting a just and peaceful settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and end to Israeli occupation. Secondly, realizing a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. And thirdly, supporting the exercise of inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including self-determination, sovereignty, and right to return. Let me also add that we implement our mandate by raising awareness to the question of Palestine through a range of activities. And among those activities, we have events and conferences at the UN headquarters in New York and abroad. We have also a capacity building program for the state of Palestine. And also every year on the 29th of November, we organize what we call the annual observance of International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian People. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, our committee has adapted and shifted activities to the virtual space, like with this virtual events series, which we will continue into the coming weeks, as the Palestinian people need our support now more than ever. Before we start, let me remind everyone that this event is being webcast live on the Facebook page of the committee. And this is an interactive event, so we encourage viewers from around the world to submit questions through the Facebook comment box in the live video stream. Viewers also can send the questions to the email dpr-meeting@un.org. Everyone is also encouraged to tweet the hashtag #rights for the digit 4 Palestine, #rights for Palestine. This event is being recorded and will later be posted on the web page of the committee, as well as on our social media channels, Facebook and YouTube. Let me now turn to our speakers. I have all the CVs, but if I have to read the CVs, it will take us time. So we have with us today Mr. Ali Gheith, a Palestinian journalist and activist from East Jerusalem. Mrs. Randa Siniora, Palestinian human rights and women's rights activist, and Director General of the Women's Center for Legal Aid and Counselling. And lastly, we have Mr. Issam Younis, Director General of the Mezan Center for Human Rights in Gaza. Mr. Gheith, Mrs. Siniora, Mr. Younis, good afternoon to you in Palestine. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay. May I ask first Mr. Gheith to tell us and tell our viewers about the situation in East Jerusalem during the current situation. How are you and how are your neighbors and the Palestinian community dealing with the situation right now? I can give you something like 6 minutes, Mr. Gheith, to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, for the opportunity to speak today. I send you good wishes of health and wellness to all the nations of the world. Before answering the question, I will be laying some grounds for my statement. So Israel has been practicing suppressive policies in East Jerusalem for the past 53 years, including land confiscations, settlement building, restrictions on construction, house demolitions, restrictions of freedom of movement, withdrawal of residency identities, and isolating Jerusalem from the West Bank by erecting the separation wall. With Israel controlling and using 87% of the land east of the city, 215,000 settlers are living in East Jerusalem. Its goal is to control the most significant size possible of the Palestinian territories, displacing Palestinians and reducing the Palestinian population in the city. So after the establishment of the separation wall, these policies have intensified, and communities outside the wall were formed that are not subject to the Palestinian rule, but are subordinate to the Jerusalem municipality, thus pay taxes similar to those living in West Jerusalem. As for those communities outside the wall, they are distributed as follows. We have at the northern area, we have Kafr Aqab, Semiramis, Shirayat, and the airport region, Al-Matar. To the east, we have Ras Khamis, Al-Salam suburb, and Shafat refugee camp. And to the south, we have Sheikh Saad, Al-Walaji, and part of Al-Sawahri and Abu Dis. The number of Palestinian population in these communities is approximately 150,000, and their percentage constitutes 16.5% of the total population of Jerusalem. The total amount spent by the municipality of the occupation to develop these communities and neighborhoods in the east of the city does not exceed 9% of the municipal budget. So there is a flagrant distinction in the disbursement process that results in the neglection of the provision of these social services that include health, education, and infrastructure. Speaking of the communities mentioned, they suffer from high population density. They are indolent in health follow-up measures, despite the presence of some representatives of the Israeli health centers. And with the emergence of a global pandemic such as COVID-19, it will adversely affect these communities and threaten their standing. We can define the commitments that Israel as an occupying power needs to concern itself with are the preventative measures, awareness campaigns, random and arranged examinations, emergency medical services, economic support for families affected under the principle of social solidarity, and securing a decent life. As the saying goes, information is power. However, there wasn't enough information dispensed by the Israeli Ministry of Health regarding the situation of Palestinians in East Jerusalem, especially those communities behind the wall. The information on the numbers of infected people announced by the Palestinian Ministry of Health is gathered through the infected themselves. And when and if they decide to take the news to social media platforms. Such cases would be a patient from Silwan who published a video announcing his infection and implored people to get tested. And another was from Ras Al Amoud, who announced the news of the contamination of 2 people through a mosque's speakerphone. The Palestinian Authority is also trying to gather more information, but its activity is impeded by the Israeli Authority, and Palestinian leaders are being arrested day in and day out. Also, the Palestinian Ministry of Health doesn't have jurisdiction in East Jerusalem, therefore the information dispensed is not 100% accurate. By Israel not dispensing accurate information regarding the infected Palestinians in East Jerusalem, it would be weakening the people's position in combating this pandemic, and it would blatantly and explicitly violate its obligation under international law. Up until today, there are 132 coronavirus cases in East Jerusalem and 123 in Jerusalem's Palestinian suburbs, as announced by the Palestinian Minister of Health in her brief this morning. Unconfirmed sources estimate that there are a dozen more cases in East Jerusalem neighborhoods that haven't been reported yet. At the onset of the pandemic, Israeli entities, especially the Ministry of Health, didn't take any strict measurements to thwart the spread of the virus in the Palestinian neighborhoods of East Jerusalem. And it included, there wasn't any sufficient awareness in Arabic for the residents. There weren't any examination centers for Palestinians living behind the separation wall. There was an examination complex in West Jerusalem, however, near Ramallah, the Teddy Stadium. But under the restriction of travel, Palestinians in East Jerusalem neighborhoods couldn't arrive to get tested. There were no random examinations, such as those carried out at Jewish neighborhoods in West Jerusalem, most notably in Bnei Brak. In Silwan, the Israeli police raided a Palestinian medical center set up by the emergency committee, allegedly in violation of the law. The Israeli authorities shut down initiatives done by civil society organizations in East Jerusalem or the Palestinian youth, and their organizers were fined or investigated. These initiatives include providing food to affected households and the disinfection and sterilization of the streets in the old city. So, and additionally, the Israeli police continues to repress Palestinians and issues fines left, right, and center, all under the pretext of applying national instructions to combat the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, the Israeli Ministry of Health, the procedures, including examinations or awareness campaigns in Arabic, were completely absent from the Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. The situation is bleak in these overcrowded, high-risk neighborhoods, especially behind the wall, and the Arabic awareness campaign that were released only recently couldn't provide solace or direction at a time where the only information source for Palestinian Jerusalemites were social media platforms and hearsay, exacerbating the problem and providing a fertile environment for misinformation and rumor spreading. Finally, Palestinians could easily decipher that Israel is only interested in stopping the migration of the disease from Arab to Jewish neighborhoods rather than attain to the rightful needs of Palestinians under the occupying power. I believe that this pandemic is as hurtful as it is to humanity. It sheds another light on the Palestinian pandemic, the Israeli occupation. It would be a tangible reminder, if all previous ones were not noticed, that Palestinians are living under occupation that should have ended a long time ago. These gruesome health repercussions have surfaced now, and unfortunately, I think they will continue to do so until the international community takes a firm stand against Israel and fulfill their obligation towards the Palestinians, not just in financial aid, but in assistance towards saving humanity in this part of the world and end occupation. Thank you.
Microphone. Mr. Chairman.
Microphone. Okay, let me see. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I thank Mr. Gheith for his presentation, which is really a very horrifying account of what's going on the ground. I would like now to give the floor to Mrs. Siniora, and I would like to ask her to talk about what it is like for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank right now, and especially for Palestinian women. What is the situation? And are there any special hurdles or challenges they face? You have the floor, Mrs. Siniora.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I would like first to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the committee for inviting me for this virtual event, where I would like to share with you our worries during this pandemic, living under Israeli military occupation. Of course, the pandemic is global and is affecting all the humanity, as my colleague Ali mentioned, but it is very unique in our situation as Palestinian people living under Israeli military occupation for over 5 decades now. I think that almost 6 decades, maybe, and now since 67. So we are talking about a situation where the Israeli occupying authority is ignoring completely their legal obligations under international law, international human rights and humanitarian law. The occupying authority is responsible, has effective control over the occupied territory, and expected to provide all the precautions and medical care and of the Palestinian people. Unlike what is expected and against what has been initiated by the Secretary General, UN Secretary General about stopping wars and armed conflicts and so on, our situation is continuing as usual. I say business as usual for the Israeli military occupation. You can only review the reports of UN OCHA in the occupied territory to notice within the last 2 weeks, for example, how much the violations of systematic violations of human rights continued. Now, this is even more problematic to us as women because we are being affected disproportionately by COVID-19 and the Israeli occupation. This is because we are talking about deep-rooted inequalities and traditional roles which women are playing within the Palestinian society, which increase the burdens and responsibilities of women. For example, during the past 2 weeks, there has been demolition or dismantling of around 18 property-owned structures for the Palestinians, either for lack of license or for other reasons. Now, among them, the women have to take the responsibility for the absence of the household and the house for the family. And many of the Jerusalemites, for example, have taken the decision to demolish their own homes to reduce the expenses of being demolished by the Israeli, where they have to pay the expenses of the demolition. So now this is increasing the burdens on women. Only during the last 2 weeks, for example, there has been night raids going on very regularly. And we know that during the lockdown, where everybody or the family are confined to the house, still the traditional roles make it the responsibility of women for child caring, for caring for the elderly, for disabilities, people who are sick, and so on. That is increasing the responsibilities and the burdens. Now, with the night raids and house arrest of the children, although especially house arrests, most of the arrests have been night raids were taking place 60% in East Jerusalem, but also in H2 area in Hebron, Old City, which is under the control of the Israelis. Now, this where most of the violations are taking place as usual, and with complicity also combined with the settler violence and vandalism against the Palestinian civilian population, and the threat that is being imposed by this vandalism and attacks, either with complicity of the soldiers or by the settlers themselves. Now, the arrests taking place during this time are taking place with a widespread of the virus among the Israeli soldiers. They're doing that without masks, without gloves, and arresting, beating up the kids, arresting them in Israeli settlements like from H2 area in Kiryat Arba, and the threats that are entailed on passing the pandemic to the members of the family. And that is one of the very big concerns of women within the family. In addition to that, of course, the other Israeli practices, I would say the discriminatory policy of the Israeli occupation in dealing with this pandemic to the Palestinian population. And specifically, there are a lot of cases and concerns regarding Palestinian women in the, from the West Bank married to Jerusalemites who are residing now, perhaps they outdated their permits to live in Jerusalem, cannot benefit from any services, especially medical services from the Palestinian Authority, because they cannot move. The restriction of movement without having permits, and cannot obtain new ones, or are restricted politically from getting one because of the Israeli policies. And at the same time, they cannot benefit from either the Israeli medical system, which is discriminating against us anyway, but also they cannot benefit from the medical services provided by the Palestinian Authority. So the women are caught under such situations where we see all these punitive measures impacting everybody, but increasing the burdens and responsibilities of women within the household and the family, and neglecting the needs of women themselves. Now, we're talking about a situation where arrests of every member of the family, male members, children, is continuing. There has been 4 new arrests of women. There are 43 women under Israeli detention and in prisons. No precautions are taken. Israeli policy of movement of the Palestinian workers from Israel to the occupied territory and from the occupied territory are done without any preventive or precautions measures from avoiding the contraction of the pandemic to others. And that the statistics that my colleague Ali spoke reflect how much this is coming from either mingling or being with the, either working or entering into Israel. And this is really the threat where the pandemic is passing to the Palestinian population. Now, all of that is combined with closures under pretext of the pandemic, but these are systematic policies of the Israelis to restrict the movement between the areas. And the good example is the example of women with chronic diseases from the Gaza Strip. Especially, we've got evidence-based data from many women who are getting the treatment for cancer in Jerusalem hospitals, which are lacking a lot of the needs, especially and now, but there is no testing, and now there are no permits for them to continue with their medical treatment. But there is also the threat of, even these women were telling us, we would not wish, even if we're given permits, to go to Jerusalem or be referred for medical treatment and help. So we are talking about a situation where the occupying authority is not taking their responsibilities towards the Palestinian civilian population at one hand, and the economic hardships are increasing, with many women. For example, one of the evidence-based data in the Susia area, in the Hebron area, was of women collecting some of the wild thyme and plants for selling them after her husband stopped working from Israel after the pandemic. She has been her son was arrested, and they were not allowed to collect these natural plants in order to sell them for the income of the family. So we find the economic hardships within the household because of the traditional roles, because of the increase of the domestic violence as well within a patriarchal structure. So we're talking about a third threat now, the pandemic with the occupation and the structural patriarchy in our society, all combined together are increasing and exacerbating the sufferings of Palestinian women under occupation and under this serious pandemic. And therefore, the measures should be taken, and the international community should be made responsible and accountable of making the Israeli military occupation as an occupation responsible to take its legal obligations under international law. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Siniora, I thank you so very much for your first-hand insight about that very terrible situation you are living in the West Bank. And now, and last but not least, I will give the floor to Mr. Younis and ask him if he could give us his views about the situation in Gaza, which also seems so dire. How are Gazans coping with this new challenge, added to the ongoing difficulties? And what is your message to the world, Mr. Younis? You have the floor, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you again for inviting me to this very important discussion with the Palestinian civil society. And I'll begin with the fact that we all the time were alarming that the worst is yet to come. And no one has moved to put an end for the misery in that part of the world. Gaza, as you know, is an overly crowded place, one of the most densely populated areas on this globe. The geography is around 360 square kilometers, and the number of people who are living there are more than 2 million. The bulk of the people are refugees, which means that they are dependent on UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency, for their needs and for their health, etc. The COVID-19 pandemic, which has been a global crisis, definitely that part of the world has also been affected by that. The Gaza is being in this situation while living in a very, very unprecedented situation under blockade that was imposed for the last 14 years, which is unprecedented since the year 1967. It's not only a collective punishment, though it is outlawed under international law, but there is a process of de-development, as if you're taking Gaza and throw it backward 60 or 70 years. This means that they intentionally kill any hope for the people and make life very difficult, and Gaza cannot cope with any development process in case the blockade to be alleviated. The measures that were taken by the Israelis, I mean, the blockade is in fact the restrictions on the movement for the individuals and goods. And this de-development process is quite serious. The dynamics of the blockade, as well as the impact of the blockade on the different aspects of daily life, is quite clear and has undermined the different services. And amongst those services is definitely the healthcare system, which already in a very deep crisis and almost collapsing because of the policy of blockade, which would prevent the entry to Gaza of the basics and its needs. Many of the surgeries in Gaza, many of the patients who need special treatment, especially cancer patients, the only way to pursue their medication is to go outside Gaza. So they are being referred to hospitals outside Gaza and Jerusalem, at the Augusta Victoria Hospital or other hospitals. And then if a patient in Gaza is being diagnosed to be a cancer patient, then there is a very, very exhaustive process of security permits and referral process. Sometimes a patient who is 2 years old or 5 years old being granted a permit to go to the hospital, and then none of his parents would be granted it. So the only one who could accompany him is a grandfather or a grandmother who himself or herself needs someone to take care of them. So you could imagine how it is. For the last 5 years, it was ups and downs. The number of permits that, or patients who were granted a permit could be half of those who submit applications to the relevant authorities, and half of them denied those permits to pursue their medication. And in the case of cancer, time is being calculated by days, maybe or weeks, rather than months or years. So there is a real danger, potential danger on the lives of those people because of the blockade that is imposed. So the restrictions on the movement, imagine for the patients who cannot pursue. In Gaza, there is no single radiotherapy system, for example, which is a must in the case of cancer treatment. The only way is to refer patients to outside Gaza. Gaza is finally, it's an open prison, one of the largest open prisons in this globe. However, in any prison, you have the administration of the prison that would be responsible for the needs of the prisoners. In the case of Gaza, it's a prison, while the administration of the prison doesn't at all assume any responsibility vis-a-vis civilians in Gaza Strip who are protected under international law. So collective punishment is quite serious and quite of serious dynamics on everything. And in the best case scenario, before the epidemic, the system is collapsing. And now with the current situation, the worst again is yet to come. Gaza is again a unique situation. It's very fragile because it's quite dependent on others, on aid. 75% of the people are refugees. According to OCHA figures, before the epidemic, more than 80%, 85% of the Gaza families are dependent on humanitarian aid provided by different agencies. And poverty has been increased dramatically before, and imagine now, where many people have lost their jobs with the lockdown of the economy. So money has joined the club, and the percentage of unemployment has been dramatically arose to reach maybe 70-80%, and it's expected also to be even more than that. The number of people or the percentage of people who are living under severe poverty, more than half of the people are living in poverty. So the situation is very, very serious, very collapsing, and again the blockade is a collective punishment that's in violation of basic principles of international humanitarian law. At the beginning, there was sort of, biopolitics where the calories have been calculated for the community. So the Israelis were allowing only the basic needs that would keep them alive. And that was the policy all the time long. The humanitarian crisis that is in Gaza is, though it's humanitarian and it's devastating, however, it's pure political crisis, and one should address the political context. I mean, why is the misery? Why is this deterioration on the ground of the humanitarian situation and other spheres? Simply because of the blockade, of the occupation, and sending money and parcels of food to Gaza, though it's important, definitely is important, but without addressing the main cause of the misery, the main cause of the problem, which is the blockade and the occupation, I think will go nowhere. Well, money that was sent will not go to its intended end. And it's a moment of the truth to address the blockade. And I think the key word in the occupied territories in general, and top of them in Gaza, is accountability. As long as the Israeli occupation forces are not accountable to their practices, which has been identified and described by Mr. Goldstone in his report, who headed a mission established by the Human Rights Council in the year 2009, and then the committee to investigate the Israeli practices in Gaza, West Bank, in the year 2012, and then the recent report of 2014 have identified many of the Israelis have perpetrated to amount to war crimes or crimes against humanity, which are punishable under international law. And without addressing accountability seriously, I think victims will continue to pay a very high price out of that. We are talking about civilians who are protected, and this is occupied territories, and rules of international law are quite clear. And I think international community here should begin now a different way of engaging with this part of the world. We cannot leave victims without any remedy. We cannot leave victims without any reparation. Victims have a full right to be protected, and Israel continue its practices on a daily basis. Today, I mean, we have a fisherman who was shot in the sea while he's fishing and earning his livelihood. He was hit in the head by a rubber bullet, and his boat was also damaged. And this is a routine way of dealing with Gaza. While we are combating this the COVID-19, I think people should have access to their basics. The number of ventilators in Gaza are some 63 ventilators. They cannot cope with the needs of the people. I mean, already 75% out of those sets have already been occupied by the people. So imagine in case of the outbreak of the virus, it would be something really serious. And here I'm alarming that without addressing the basic issue, the main cause of the problem, which is the occupation. The key word is OCCUPTION. The occupation is the source of the problem, and the dynamics of the blockade, again, are quite serious. The speakable is so much, the unspeakable is even more than that. I mean, if you kill any home vis-a-vis the people, if people, imagine someone, his home was destroyed in 2008, and then a family member was killed in 2012, and when he rebuilt his home, I mean, when the Israelis would allow some construction material to Gaza, he reconstructed his home, and this home has again been destroyed in 2014. Then what to do and where to go? That's why accountability is a basic issue and a main issue to combat even the epidemic. Gaza cannot cope with this. The number of tests that were allowed, kits of tests that were allowed to Gaza were very, very few, some 3,000 or 4,000, which, I mean, the number of tests that have been used is less than 0.05% of the people, which is, you could not find it anywhere in the world. So without allowing the easy entry of the basics for Gaza and lifting the closure that's imposed for the last 14 years, I think we'll expect the worst to come to Gaza. My message again, it's a moment of truth. International law is there, and now we are waiting to fulfillment of the basic principles and duties over states. And without alleviating the blockade, I think we'll continue to suffer, and victims will continue to suffer in this part of the world. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador.
Mr. Younis, I thank you very much for your account of what is happening in what you call and what which really is the open prison of Gaza and the collective punishment, which is unabated in these very difficult circumstances related to COVID-19. And thank you also for the message you put forward. Now, I will like to ask, first of all, Bureau members to intervene, and I would like also to welcome our colleague from Indonesia, the permanent representative of Indonesia, Mr. Jani, Ambassador Jani, whom I welcome to take the floor. I know that he has another meeting he has to attend to very, very briefly. In a short time. So I would like, first of all, to give him the floor before giving the floor to other colleagues from the Bureau. Ambassador Jani, you have the floor if you are there.
All right. Okay. First of all, thank you very much for the speakers. I think I've heard quite closely what you are all saying on what's happening on the ground. Certainly, I also concur with what our colleague Issam mentioned on becoming a big prison, Gaza, which is quite true. Also, with my sister Randa, I hope I take the name right, which is the double challenge of pandemic and occupation. And as you know, this we have always been following closely what's happening on the ground. And as for Indonesia, the issue of Palestine has always been near and dear to our heart. And certainly we will support any efforts in trying to ensure that your life is, that Palestine gets its independence. Now, my question is directly on this, because you mentioned about the accountability, and I completely agree with my brother Issam when he mentioned that the authorities, it's the obligation of the occupying power also to legal obligation under international law of the occupying power to provide safety and health measures to Palestine in the OPT. With that said, could you share more thoroughly how far that they have been doing this role, particularly with this new cabinet that is going to come into places, as well as on the access on humanitarian crisis. I agree completely that this issue is not only an issue of occupation, it becomes more and more dangerous because of this pandemic. And precisely the question is that the excess of food, I'm just so worried also that this is going to create hunger and starvation in many parts. So the question would be, is that the global supply chain and food chain, is it available? Is it getting more higher the price? And also the humanitarian needs and access to food to reach the needy. We're talking about time. Time is of the constraint. And that is the first question. The second question is that I'm just worried that with all this seclusion, with all this blockade, there will be density of population in several parts of the OPT, and this would create more problem, and people will be more affected, because if you're moving, refugees is moving, as well as there's density of population, then there will be more possibilities of this virus, of this pandemic, become infected to other part of the population. Is there any action in the localities that can be undertaken, and what could we do as the Bureau to help also? This is one important thing, because we're talking now about time, and we're talking about this that has been going on a long time until now, but it has become more exacerbated with this time of pandemic. So I think I leave it at that, Chair. But before leaving, once again to express our complete support for our brother and sister in the Palestine. We hope for all the best. We will continue the fight so that Palestine will get its independence. And once again, Indonesia will be together. As I mentioned also, there was a mention also about the question of hospital. I forgot to ask this question also. We have a hospital in Gaza also. I was wondering whether there is going to be hampering of, is there readily accessible to the population there? So to ensure that they not only get the normal health care, but also pandemic care, because this is another issue again that are looming in front of us. I think I'll leave it at that. Once again, Chair, I will be continuing monitoring this with two gadgets, as you know, because I'm also having another session. Once again, all the best. Thank you so much.
Ambassador Jani, thank you for your comments and for your question. I know that my colleagues from the Bureau will intervene. I expect that the other ambassadors, including also Minister Mansour, will intervene. But I have just one question to complement what Ambassador Jani has said. That's a question coming from Ambassador Feda Abdelhadi Nasser, the DPR of Palestine, who asked the question to Mrs. Siniora, and she's asking you to what kind of support your organization is able to provide to women in need at this time, considering both the restrictions imposed by the occupation and the lockdown as a result of the pandemic. So now I give you the floor to the three of you to respond to Ambassador Jani and to the question I have just raised on behalf of Ambassador Feda. Okay, who want to take the floor first?
Shall I start? You want me to?
Yes,
yeah. Okay. Support to, the question counseling has continued providing the services for women online and has continued to support women in victims of gender-based violence specifically, because this is where we focus. With regard to the humanitarian support to women and the economic hardships entailed and so on, we are joining efforts with other organizations through the voluntary groups and the voluntary initiatives all over the occupied territory, including East Jerusalem, because we are also functioning in Jerusalem and we are following up on these cases. We are also specifically looking at the cases of the most vulnerable, including women, of course, who are heading the households, who have been lost their jobs, because as you most probably know, women are working in the informal sector. They are working, they are the first one to be relegated back to the household and are losing their jobs because of the pandemic. Even in the Jordan Valley, many of the women are working in Israeli settlements, illegal settlements in the occupied territory, because they can be the only ones who have access to the settlements to work because of quote unquote political security considerations by the occupation. Now the worries are very big and very wide. You know, we are not an organization that is focused on humanitarian needs, but we are trying to highlight these needs, and especially for victims of gender-based violence and victims of the Israeli occupation, in order to make sure that we provide some kind of humanitarian support, but also refer those cases to the organizations and voluntary groups that are working on that. Actually, our worries are increasing with the formulation of this new government, emergency Israeli government, Gantz Netanyahu government, and that really, if the policies of illegal annexation proposed in the election campaigns are being implemented under the shadow of the pandemic, we are expecting the worst still to come, my colleague Issam, still worse to come with Israel implementing, creating further facts on the ground. We're part of the initiative of civil society organizations at all levels to address the issues of illegal violations and Israel's accountability. We're working with all the efforts towards bringing the ICC into investigating these incidents and carrying the more serious investigation into the occupied territory. We think that all measures should be taken to protect the civilian population. It's due time now more than ever to protect the civilian population under occupation, under this prolonged military occupation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Siniora. Can I now give the floor to Mr. Gheith to respond to or make comments about what he has just heard from Ambassador Jani and also the question I asked. The question asked was for Mrs. Siniora, but what Ambassador Jani has said. You have the floor, Mr. Gheith.
Yes, I will jump in. Thank you. This situation is affecting all Palestinians living anywhere in the occupied Palestinian territory, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, in the West Bank, all the demographics, the young, the old, women, men, the youth. So basically, I will join my voice with my colleagues, is that this is the time where where the international community takes a firm stand and just raise this issue, because as my colleague Ms. Randa said, this is occupation mixed with a pandemic. So this is a very dangerous formula that needs to be addressed right away. People will not be able to sustain themselves. They will not be able to put up with this occupation and its belligerent activities that are on the ground, which the virus, this pandemic, has just enabled to come to the surface. I mean, we have been talking about this for a long time, about this occupation and what it does to us and how it affects our future and our present, that we're not able to be living in freely. But now with this pandemic, what else can we say? Everything is right there in the open. All the statistics, everybody is talking about what's happening on the ground. The phrase about Gaza being an open prison, this has been the manchette, the headline of Gaza for a long time. So how can Gaza sustain itself with a pandemic looming on the horizon? It cannot withstand that. Palestinians cannot withstand the COVID-19, not now, not ever. We're not like any other country in the world. If I can say a country, we need to be called a country and to be treated as such. Thank you.
Maybe I would just want to say one more thing about the briefing of the Security Council, which is coming next Thursday. That's a very good opportunity to highlight the implications of the pandemic on the lives of civilians living under Israeli occupation. And I think we should more, as civil society organizations, make benefit of the briefings that we could make before, during the Israeli-Palestinian conflict discussions in the Security Council. But now that the discussion is coming very soon, this Thursday, I think we should bring in that issue to the attention of the Security Council and the international community, that building on what the Secretary General has said about stopping wars and armed conflicts and occupation, all these conflicts, to put all the efforts towards combating the pandemic. I think this is the right time to highlight the needs of the Palestinian people living under occupation, and to brief the committee of the implications and negative implications on the civilian population in the OPT, and really to take specific measures. If the humanity does not change during such a wide global pandemic, when? It is when. I mean, what are we going to do? No, we are not finding, no attention to our humanitarian needs, nor to our political needs and our rights to self-determination. Under these situations, this is more needed than ever, that the international community stand up to its responsibilities.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Siniora, for what you have just said. Mr. Younis?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Ambassador Dijani, for your nice words and for the questions. And to get the maximum use of time, I think there is no need to invent the wheel anymore. International law is there, and what is needed is to apply what civilized nations accepted of standards, especially in the aftermath of the Second World War. Accountability is the main issue in the occupied territories, because without addressing accountability, we'll reproduce the misery again. And my message is to reconsider the whole engagement with this part of the world. This utilitarian way of dealing with the justice, with the human rights violations, I believe it will not lead to anywhere. It will lead to the worsening the situation, and it will be costly on civilians who are protected under international law. The accountability has never been dealt by the Israeli system, neither the judiciary nor other branches, and they all the time provide the legal and political cover of the practices of the army in the occupied territories, whether in Jerusalem, in the West Bank with the wall and the settlements, and in Gaza with the blockade. And I think compared with anywhere in the world, the judiciary in Israel is the only judiciary that boycotts the victims. I mean, everywhere you might find a victim who boycotts a system claiming that it's unfair, biased. But in the case of the occupied, it's the system which is boycotts the victims. No way to pursue justice in the Israeli system. And who investigates with who? I mean, the MAG, the military advocate general, who orders and who gives the instructions for the army, is the one who is entrusted to conduct the investigations. we did not hear of any criminal investigations, of serious investigations of the different thousands and thousands of cases that we have submitted to the Office of the MAG. We, as a human rights organizations, we cooperate with the Office of the Military Advocate General, the Israeli one, and we submit what we have of cases and complaints. And finally, most of the cases are closed. There is no ground for that because the soldiers feel that they're immune. They are provided the full cover to continue their practices. Then if the system would not or should be a system is not the place, the judiciary is not the place to pursue justice, then where to go? I mean, what has been left is the ICC, and the ICC is not an end by itself, by the way. It's a way to show the absence of justice, the absence of accountability, and then it's a civilized mechanism where international civilized nations have accepted as a way to settle down such conflicts, and we are waiting for ICC to establish investigation of the crimes that have been committed that were quite serious, when homes were multi-story buildings were destroyed on top of those who live in, mosques, hospitals, infrastructures have been destroyed, whole families of 18 members have been deleted from the civil registry, from babies to infants to 90 years old grandfather. Can we tolerate this? I think it's a moment of truth. So we have to addressing the pandemic in this context, in the absence of the accountability, and the blockade is on top of that. Can a society live with this blockade for 14 years, which is, as a starting point before the epidemic, was suffering from very shortages? I mean, food shortages, food security shortages. The health system is almost collapsing. Most of the consumables, as well as drugs, all the time there is acute shortages. More than 40% of the drugs are out of stock. No improvements were put for the system. In addition to the staff, the health personnel, this is part of the development. They were not trained for the last 14 years. They were not engaged with others. And now, how to cope with this epidemic? Countries with the very standard figures, good figures of economy and health system cannot cope with the epidemic. And now, talking about Gaza and this situation, there is a chronic health problems here in the Gaza Strip. That's why I'm saying that no need to invent the wheel. It's easy. We have international law and we have obligations, and those should be implemented. Now, praising Israel for the goodwill that they showed during the last month or last weeks, it's good. But here, it's not the goodwill, it's the obligations on the occupying power, and we should be clear on that. We should stop this saying that, oh, that's good, this is good symptoms, goodwill for Israel by allowing the shipments of medical supplies. It's beyond that. It's legal obligations on the state of Israel as an occupying power, and we should be clear on this. And we should push and apply pressure on the state of Israel to lift its blockade so people can live in a way that would give them a potential possibility to cope with the virus. Thank you.
I thank you very much, Mr. Younis, and I thank all our panelists for responding to the questions raised by our colleague. You know, when we started this exercise, we had an average of 150 viewers on Facebook. I guess that the number maybe has increased. And we have already received many comments of viewers and also some questions. I will just pass to you one question asked by Mr. Steve Kalishman from the Jordan Valley Sister Cities. And his question is, what can the UN, in your view, what can the UN do to compel compliance by Israel with Security Council resolutions? Who want to start first? Mrs. Siniora, you want to speak first?
That's a very good question.
Okay. Well, it's a very difficult question, although it looks simple. It's the international legitimacy, the UN resolutions that are all supportive of the Palestinian just cause, but at the same time, it requires the political will. It is this absence of the political will to end such a prolonged belligerent occupation. And actually, we always consider UN resolutions as being very important in establishing our rights to self-determination, to independence, to ending such a prolonged occupation. Now, it's the responsibility of the international community to say enough is enough, and to set forth measures to put these resolutions into practice. So we don't need additional resolutions. We have many resolutions that have been taken by the UN, by the Human Rights Council, by Security Council, by the General Assembly. We have also, the Hague ruling over the wall and its illegality, which has established international human rights, humanitarian law, and Israeli responsibilities. We have all the body of comments of the different treaty bodies and special procedures of the United Nations that have established many of our rights. Now, I think it is the political will of the international community to take it over. Maybe the UN committee, we're talking here and we have the privilege of speaking. I think that they have to take up the responsibility to push more towards politicians and states who are supportive of our cause to do something about ending this prolonged occupation now and before ever. Thank you.
Yes, can I add something on this? I will be transferring the what the people talk about as a journalist. Basically, there is this legal framework, or three legal framework, that Israel is obliged to do, because they are under the international humanitarian law, which is concerning the law of occupation, and the international human rights law, and the constitution, the Israeli constitution, of taking care of Palestinians living under their rule. However, the main problem is that Israel doesn't see itself as an occupying power, and this is where the terminology mixes up, and that's why there are no, I think from my perspective, there are no decisions or resolutions that really enforce Israel or make Israel just stand and abide by what needs to be done. This is how the people look at it. However, to be honest with you, many of the people that I've been interviewing and talking with, they also have the same question, like, what is the United Nations doing regarding the Israeli occupation? I mean, all of these countries under this one roof, meeting every day and discussing and know the statistics and know the exact problem, and nothing has happened yet. All of these resolutions that supposedly come from this mega power, the United Nations, of all the countries in the world, they cannot seem to be to solve this problem. What is the main problem behind that? That is what the people are talking about. That's what they are convinced with. They need action. So this action cannot be done unless the United Nations as a whole just makes itself clear about this. It is clear with all the articles or the resolution. It is clear. However, the role, the action is not clear. It's not there yet. So this is exactly what we need as Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Gheith. Mr. Younis?
Yes, thank you so much. Before I address your very important point and the question, I think two things are important here. First, I would like to thank the United States for refusing the pressures that are intensively being employed on the different organs, whether political or others. We know very well that it's a moment where pressure is being employed, and the United Nations still resisting that and refusing. Really thank you. We thank United Nations for that. Second, special thanks goes to the UNRWA that is working in a very tough time and a very difficult situation in the different areas of its operation in the 5 areas in the Middle East, in West Bank, Gaza, and other parts. where we are witnessing this very organized campaign to defund the UNRWA and to trying to end its mandate, because the question here is not the UNRWA in itself. It's beyond that. It's the legal status of the refugees. So we believe now it's a moment where the United Nations to reiterate its stance and to differently engage with this part of the world. The technical work as well as the political work. Especially, we have witnessed yesterday the formation of one of the most dangerous governments ever that was established in the state of Israel, that they have clearly declared that they are going into a process of annexation of the occupied territories. So we are expecting the United Nations to say its word now, that to highlight the legal status of the occupied territories, and to empower UNRWA and other organs to do their very vital work for refugees. And as long as there is a refugees problem, UNRWA will continue to work and will be supported and should be supported. And away from the political organs of the United Nations, we know the chemistry, we know the how things and decision making there, but the United Nations still have a mandate. It's the moral authority in this globe, and should express that quite clearly when it comes to this chronic problem, the Palestinian problem. When it comes to accountability, I think it's a moment to address that. When it comes to refugees, I think it's important now to reiterate what has been all the time highlighted and has been said. And I think the United Nations should be outspoken now on the eve of establishing such notorious and very, very dangerous government that was established in Israel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Younis. Now I'm going to give the floor to one of my colleagues, Ambassador Neville Gheith, Permanent Representative of Namibia to the UN. Dear friend, you have the floor. Pleasure seeing you here.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for organizing this important discussion this morning. I also want to thank all the panelists for the important information that they're sharing with us. Of course, an already terrible situation has now become even worse. What we need to constantly remind ourselves is that politics aside, we are having human beings who are suffering unspeakable hardship now for more than 70 years. This is the time more than ever before for the world to demonstrate their so-called shared values and put humanity as the main value. What this pandemic is showing is that it does not discriminate between haves and have-not. Everybody around this planet, around this global community, are affected in one way or another by this pandemic. And we can just imagine how much worse the situation is now for the Palestinian people. Mr. Chair, there's been some efforts recently amongst various member states and groupings of member states here at the UN, where letters have been written to the Secretary General. I remember of a few of them that had asked that the Secretary General demand coercive measures to be lifted against a number of countries where there are sanctions and all these kind of pressures being put on governments. I do not recall that we as a committee have joined those initiatives, but perhaps we could consider writing a letter as well as a committee to the SG, pleading the case of the Palestinians under this particular circumstances, demanding that this matter be resolved now more than ever before. I think you would also, of course, some of the panelists have already talked about the Secretary General's demand for conflicts to end during this time. And I think this too we could highlight in a letter or in correspondence to the Secretary General, highlighting that here too is a case that will just get worse if we do not now strike the iron and try and push for the Palestinian people to get their day in the sun. Of course, we are watching with deep concern the new government formation in Israel. And of course, we know that this is likely to make things even more worse than they are already. And we hope that with the Secretary General's background in dealing with humanitarian situations, we could reignite in him his passion to assist and to ensure that the rights of Palestinian people are respected and are defended under these circumstances. Already, fears that we are seeing in experiencing in other countries, in Namibia, for example, we have rolled out an emergency income grant, which is a once-off payment that our government is giving to citizens who have now lost their income, who are now stuck in their homes. So, because we are scared, we are afraid that hunger will set in, that people are going to become more desperate. And because of joblessness, these challenges could lead to a threat to governance in other countries. And I can just imagine that this kind of challenges will be in front of the Palestinian people any day now, much more than it's already been. And we have to point to the need to ensure that nobody goes hungry, that nobody is denied access to healthcare at this critical time. We are seeing also an increase in domestic violence under these lockdown circumstances. And you can imagine that this adds to the desperation of countless number of women and children around the world, and particularly in situations where we are also having that we see in Gaza and in the Palestine generally. So, Chair, I don't have a question. I just wanted to share some of the things that I think we need to focus on, and as a committee, how we can perhaps look at exploring ways of highlighting the plight of the Palestinian cause at this stage, this particular point in time. The worst we can do is to see people who are already desperate denied access to basic health services when the anxiety that comes with this disease is something that I can tell people we do not want to wish on anybody. I thank you.
So very much my friend and colleague, the Ambassador of Namibia, for his very useful comments, and also for reminding us what we have to do within the committee to advance the interest and cause of the Palestinian people. We intend to have a bureau meeting in the very next days, probably before the first week of May. So during that meeting, we'll be able to review all those initiatives we need to advance. And I think this event is also for us a food for thought. I think the very passionate views given by our panelists will help us also frame the positions we need to articulate within our committee. And I know that we have Minister Mansour who has to take the floor. But before giving him the floor, I would like to just communicate one question or questions raised by a viewer, Hazza Danhush. I think the questions raised by Hazza Danhush are important, and they are. She said, I don't know if Hazza is a woman or a man. Is it a man or a woman? Okay, so Hazza has asked a question to Gheith, to Mr. Gheith, but I think they are for all of you. And the question is, how are the civil society organizations organizing together? Are the Palestinian Authority ministries leading coordination effort? Are the Palestinian Authority ministries leading coordination efforts? And how good is public and civil society organizations coordination working? But you don't need to ask to answer now. I will give the floor to Minister Riyad Mansour. And after that, when you respond to Riyad Mansour, if he has to ask questions or to his comments, we can also respond to the questions raised by our viewer. So, Minister Mansour, I have the pleasure to give you the floor. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you and my colleagues in the Bureau for organizing this second virtual event, and also to thank the division for doing all the technical support for making this event a reality. And also I want to thank my three colleagues from the different parts of the land of the State of Palestine for being with us and for their testimonies about the crimes of Israel, the occupying power, during this very special time of the pandemic of Corona-19. Mr. Chairman, I think that the committee is creative in giving the audience who are watching us first, a meeting with a representative, the director of UNRWA in the Gaza Strip, which when we had that meeting, I believe last week, in which we showed how a major agency of the United Nations are operating in carrying its mandate to Palestine refugees, in this case, the refugees in the Gaza Strip during the time of the coronavirus. And we are very grateful for that discussion that took place and for the role of UNRWA that need to be supported until the question of the Palestine refugee is resolved from all of its aspects on the basis of international law and relevant UN resolution, and in particular 194. Now, this second episode of this very effective exercise is having three individuals from Palestine civil societies to share with us the reality of the Palestinian people in the occupied territory during the time of the coronavirus and living the crimes of the Israeli occupation during this time. And we are grateful for your testimony, for the details that you gave us as a sample of how the Palestinian people are living under the crimes of the Israeli occupation during the time of the coronavirus. And perhaps, Mr. Chairman, we can also add a third segment of bringing somebody from the Palestinian government, perhaps the Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh, to share with us the perspective of the government of the State of Palestine, of how they are dealing also with occupation and the coronavirus, although as many of my colleagues have testified that it is next to impossible to be able to cope with the coronavirus when the crimes of occupation coming to the surface as being the impediment of allowing any Palestinian civil society organizations, government, any components, international organization, the case of UNRWA, for example, to carry their responsibilities under the violations of all rights of the Palestinian people as a result of occupation. So perhaps we could have the third sequel of having maybe the Prime Minister of the State of Palestine also to shed the perspective of the government of how we Palestinians are dealing with the situation of occupation under the time of the coronavirus. And let me also say to my colleagues who are adding the new component of the new government of Israel that has been formed under the banner of annexation to begin that process as of July 1st. Of course, the issue of annexation will not have been dealt with seriously without the unilateral, illegal, very offensive position of the Trump administration, which started from announcing on 17th of December 2017 of declaring Jerusalem the capital of the State of Israel and moving the embassy. But on the 28th of January of this year, they announced the remnant of the so-called Trump administration deal of deals, which paved the way and gave the green light for the formation of this government of the extreme rights and others who defected from their camps to join them in order to act on the basis of what the US administration is allowing for annexation. Now, for us as a committee and as a delegation of the State of Palestine and as Palestinian people everywhere and their leadership, including and led by President Abbas, we have been engaging in all efforts at all levels to not to allow this Trump administration plan to succeed in allowing the Israeli government to embark on annexation. And of course, those of you who referred to the Security Council meeting on Thursday, that will be a continuation of this process of exposing this illegal step by the US administration and the new Israeli government to move forward in the direction of annexation. We will do everything possible, all of us, committee, delegation of the State of Palestine, Palestinian government, civil society organizations, international bodies, including the Security Council, the General Assembly, and all of our friends in all corners of the globe, those who are upholding international law and respecting it, not to allow annexation from moving forward. So this is a task before us that we all need to be united as one in our determination to defeat it. In this connection, we appreciate what the Secretary General is doing in all fronts. On the political front, he will be with us in defending UN resolutions and the will of the international community in not allowing annexation to take place and in ending the occupation and allowing for the independence of the State of Palestine on the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. And also we support the Secretary General in dealing with issues related to fighting the pandemic, whether in the medical field and in the social and the economic field. In the medical field, we do support him in the formation of the fund of $2 billion to help the most vulnerable, including refugees, LDCs, African countries, and people who live under foreign occupation. So there's a lot of things that need to be done in order to help our people under occupation to deal with the pandemic. On the economic and the social front, there has to be a fulfillment of the SDGs and the requirement and the responsibility of the countries of the North to allow countries in the South, including people who live under foreign occupation, to be able to be helped economically, to be able to withstand and to survive the economic impact of the pandemic, so that we can move into a new era of life under the banner of solidarity, helping each other, and being able to team together as all nations, all people, to confront the pandemic. It cannot be resolved alone. It can be done with the collaboration and cooperation of all of us, and we have to do it within the UN, because the UN is the house of all nations. It is our house, and through solidarity and defending multilateralism, we will be able to succeed collectively in defeating the coronavirus, in defeating its economic impact, and in putting an end to the occupation and seeing the independence of the State of Palestine as an independent sovereign state with East Jerusalem as its capital. We thank you very much for your contribution, and we will remain in touch with you, Mr. Chairman, and all of my colleagues. I'm so delighted to see all of you well and safe, and we have a long way to go, and we have to defeat this annexation effort by this government. And I am confident that this remarkable committee that has been working for so many years to defend the rights of the Palestinian people will be in the forefront to defeat the annexation efforts by the US administration and the new government in Israel. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Permanent Observer of Palestine to the UN, thank you for your very insightful comments. And thank you also for your very pertinent and convincing suggestions about what the committee should do in terms of inviting, for example, someone from the Palestinian Authority to come and talk with the committee. And your ideas, suggestions will be taken up by the committee, as also will be the suggestions of the ambassador of Namibia. Now we have finished normally, but I will give the floor very briefly to each of you, dear panelists, for very brief comments and responses, if you want, to the questions which have been raised. So I will start with Mr. Gheith. You have the floor. Can you say something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will address the question that was raised recently about any efforts from the civil society and how are they coordinating. I would like to, even though the situation that we're in is bleak and gloomy, however, Palestinians seem always to find something to do because they are resilient, they have the love of life, they have the love of humanity. So there has been a coalition of civil society actors. It's called the Palestinian Gathering to Combat Coronavirus. So Tajammu al-Maqdisi. So this gathering is of all civil society that are working in Jerusalem, and they are working to combat any rumors, to do some fact checking about the situation in Jerusalem, because the Israeli Ministry of Health is not dispensing any information worthwhile for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem. From a different standpoint, the Palestinian Authority, anything they would do, they would be stopped by Israel. The Minister of Palestinian of Jerusalem Affairs have been arrested, and the Jerusalem governor has also been arrested. Anytime they try to do any initiative to kind of take the way forward, they would be stopped. So now the effort is on the civil society, and I think they are doing a good job with what they have, and what they can achieve is remarkable because they are together, and this is our power, this is our strength, is that we are together. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I wish you all well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gheith. Mrs. Siniora, you have the floor.
Yes, again, thank you very much for inviting us for this important event. I would just like also to comment that I liked very much the idea of Mr. Ambassador of Namibia and our ambassador, Mr. Mansour, about moving forward about this dangerous annexation policy, but also about communicating directly with the Secretary General about the situation under occupation and the pandemic, and that measures should be taken now. It's the right time to move on, to end this occupation and to take all the measures, including humanitarian measures under the situation. Of course, we're joining efforts with all coalitions of civil society, including the one in Jerusalem, my colleague Ali knows, and with all other coalitions in the West Bank. It's very important, while there's the pandemic, that human rights is put, human rights and respect for human rights and freedoms is set forth on the top of the agenda of everybody, including our own government, Palestinian government, because now with the main player, I would say, is the Palestinian Authority. With all the respect of the state of Palestine under occupation and all the efforts they're making with no cooperation from the side of the Israeli occupation, this should not undermine the role of civil society organizations in joining efforts with the official institutions to combat the pandemic, to combat the Israeli occupation and patriarchal structures. Violence against women under this situation is increasing. We should be really working to end that occupation as well. So in all, just because of this phone coming in now in the wrong timing, I just want to say thank you, and we hope that our recommendations and our efforts will be joining efforts with yours to end this occupation quickly and as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Siniora. Mr. Younis, you have the floor.
Much. Thank you. In a minute, two things. There is no half justice or a quarter justice, as if there is no half a pregnant woman or a quarter pregnant woman. Either justice or lawlessness. Either accountability or the misery will continue, and the violations and grave breaches of the basic principle of international law will continue to be committed by the Israeli army vis-a-vis protected civilians in the occupied territories. Second, we have faced with the corona epidemic. I'm talking about civil society. While civil society was defending itself with the very unprecedented campaign to delegitimize the work of civil society and to defund the civil society. There was a very organized campaign supported by the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, together with the Israeli lobbies in different parts of the world, trying to undermine the work of civil society and to link it with the funding terrorism or being anti-Semitic. This is not anymore acceptable. This is, but this is the way that we are facing, and they are doing their best to undermine our work because we raise the point of accountability. Accountability is something that is not anymore tolerable by the Israeli system. So we as civil society, we are doing our work and we continue our work. And again, we with many, globally speaking, we share many common values, and it's the time to reconsider those principles and values while others trying to undermine this and to make the rules that governs communities are rules of violations of human rights. Thank you so much, and wish you a very, very safety and very healthy situation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Gheith, Mrs. Siniora, and Mr. Younis, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you so very much for accepting to participate in our virtual event today and helping us raise awareness about the current situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. I'll have three takeaways from our meeting today. The first one is that violations are unabated. We are still having demolitions. We are still having night raids, arbitrary arrests, restrictions of movement. My second takeaway is that this situation, which has worsened, is endangering the health of the Palestinian people and also the overall situation, which is already prevailing in the occupied Palestinian territory. And my third takeaway is that the international community has to be seized of the situation. We have to do everything we can to compel Israel to respect its legal obligations, to comply with international law, with international humanitarian law. And we have to do something about it. And already we have a Security Council, as mentioned by our sister, Mrs. Siniora, which will be on Thursday. I think this will be an opportunity for countries to make sure that the voice of reason is being said and to put pressure on the occupying power to just comply with this obligation. And as you see also, this has been a very useful meeting because you have also led some of our colleagues. I can mention the ambassador of Namibia and Minister Mansour. They were able to say avenues of thought for the committee. And in our next meeting within the committee, we will have to deal with those things and see how we can advance the cause of the Palestinian people. So I would like to thank you on behalf of the committee for your commitment and the work also you do for your people, the Palestinian people. We wish you and the Palestinian people the best in these particularly challenging times. Our committee will continue to work as per our mandate until the rights of the Palestinian people are fully realized. And I also thank all our viewers for their participation, for their comments, for the questions. We were able to put all the questions to you. And a final reminder is that the recording of this event will be posted on the website of the committee, which is www.un.org/UNISPAL, and also on the committee's social media streams on Facebook and YouTube. Please also check our website for future events of our committee. Let me also thank my colleagues from the committee for their unflinching engagement. And once again, also thank the UN Division of Palestinian Rights for its very precious assistance. So I say goodbye to you. And let me also say to you all, Ramadan Kareem, be well and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye. You take care.
Bye.
Thanks.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.